Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology. I'm talking about cyber ranges today. And what I'm going to do is just put things into context and then give you one little slide. So it's going to be really simple and straightforward today. But cyber range is a thing that people may have just about heard of recently, but don't really know much about. And what I'm going to do is just give you a bit of my background and also a background on cyber ranges to put things in context. So, my original job many years ago, I started out as a flight simulation engineer in the Royal Air Force. So, working with a box on hydraulics connected to computer systems that was used then to effectively simulate a particular aircraft type. And it would have all the correct controls, physical controls, switches, dials, depending on what the controls were for the aircraft. It would be a joystick or it could be a yoke, depending on which aircraft. So, based on that, we would actually evaluate crews by putting them into the sim, working from the console, fly a mission, and identify any areas that need to work on. So, their skills as individuals, the process and procedure they're following, and also the technology that we're utilizing. Part of that process, we could actually, check if there are any issues with any of the actual real aircraft technology that was plugged into the simulation as well, and evaluate that. So that's a bit of a premise of, think about a crew that flies in a flight simulator and being evaluated to see how good they are. Another thing to think about is there was a big gap between the end of the Second World War and the first real major conflict, which was Vietnam with the Americans. And the time between it meant that there was no serving pilots that had actually fought in World War II, actually still flying at the time of the Vietnam War. Plus, the aircraft had changed dramatically. We'd moved away from, the traditional propeller-based, piston engine systems to more jet-based aircraft. So, quite a big change. And when they came to, try their tactics out in Vietnam, they were losing one aircraft and crew for 2.8 of the enemy, which is not a good ratio. You want it to be as large a ratio as possible if you can, because you're losing very few crew to actually taking out, lots of the enemy. So they looked at the situation, and what they found is over time, if they did more engagements, each of the crews would actually get better and better, and it gets to the point where it's effectively exponential, their chance of surviving. And the figure was above 10. So as long as they'd done 2 live engagements, a dogfight with the enemy, there was a good chance they were going to stay on because they built that that experience and understanding of what to do, and honed their skills in a real world environment. So let's take that to cybersecurity then. So if you look at most of your team, most of them won't have had a live engagement on something like an APT-40 or something serious. They'll have seen some, indicators of compromise. They've gone through some threat scenarios, and you may have done tabletop exercise and many other things, to actually get to a point where you believe you're ready. The trouble being is actually when you actually get a real attack for the first time, it's really challenging. And having the experience of going through that attack and seeing what it looks like and see how you can respond and what works is what we're trying to do in this scenario. So we're doing it like those Vietnam pilots. We're actually going to try and put them through the scenario as many times as possible, hopefully at least 10 times before they actually see it for the first time. And the chance of them actually, working against that attack is going to be much greater. So that's the premise then. So let's talk about cyber ranges and SimSpace specifically. So SimSpace has been around quite a while, but SimSpace was originally set up by an ex-US Air Force guy, Hutchison. And William Hutchison was a pilot out in Okinawa. I believe he's on F-16s or F-15s, not quite sure which aircraft. But he worked with a general who eventually went over to actually set up US Cyber Command. When he left his post in Okinawa and was looking to get a desk job when he was ending his flying career, what happened, he was asked by this general to say, come here and have a look at the way we do things and see how we could implement something like Red Flag. So Red Flag is the training exercise that were developed after this, during and after the Vietnam War, to actually ensure that fighter pilots had that 10 plus engagements before they did it for the first time for real. So how do we implement Red Flag into US Cyber Command? So the idea was looking at what they're currently doing, trying to come up with ways to do it. But again, in his mind, flight simulation, because it's been there quite a long time. Flight simulators have been around since the early aircraft, mainly mechanical at first, but then digitized much later. So with that in mind, again, how would we actually do what we do in a military setting within a cyber environment? So he went off and had a chat with a couple of colleagues that were working at Lincoln Labs, which is a spin-off of MIT that does a lot of work for the NSA and people like that. And they were coming up with these specific simulations for key assets and how they could actually protect those key assets, things like nuclear plants, electrical distribution, airfields, those kind of things, and seeing how you could actually protect those assets. So then looking at it, how could you then create a simulation that will be a simulation or near simulation of an organization's infrastructure from a cyber perspective? So how could you do that? So I'm going to show you a little slide. I promise this is the only slide we'll be looking at today. But the idea with this slide is to give you a bit of a picture about how a range looks and the components of it. So if you look right at the bottom, in this bottom section here, we've got industrial controls, IoT devices, and that area, because a lot of organizations do have some kind of OT, operational technology that fits into their business. If you're out in the utility space, it could be either electrical or water-based control systems. So opening sluice valves to allow gas, or turn on relays for power distribution, could be at that layer. If it was in some kind of manufacturing facility, it could be those programmable control systems, PCBs, that will be out there. If you were looking at a finance customer like a bank, it could be the ATM infrastructure that's out there. So all of these pieces effectively hang on the back of a business and help that business function. But again, there could be other OT pieces that we don't even consider as OT. Things like air conditioning systems, which are cooling our computer systems or other parts of our infrastructure, that require cooling to operate effectively. So again, these could all be points that could be used either to start or sustain an attack, or be a part of the attack, depending on the organization and what they're looking to achieve. So that's that first layer. What we can do is provide either a simulation or directly connect real OT infrastructure to the simulation. The next layer is all of your traditional compute components, all pieces that you'd use to run your business, all the servers, whether they're virtual or physical, containers, and all the components that fit together. Your cloud services, your network infrastructure, everything that actually makes up the actual operational services that your business uses to run. The next piece is all of your cyber equipment. So we will have something like network monitoring, we'll have endpoint detection, we'll have specific application to use, but we'll have some kind of SIEM platform that's going to capture all those logs and try to give us some idea and understanding of what's happening within our infrastructure, and some kind of SOAR platform that's just going to give us a visualization of what's happening. And also, we may have a number of behavioral tools and things at our disposal, looking at what's happening with users or the behavior of equipment and software on the network. So all of those pieces we utilize in identifying but also dealing with an attack. So we need to have all of those components within us, the simulation. The other thing we need to do is make sure that this simulation is alive. We don't really want to have to stick, hundreds, if not thousands, of users in there, to actually create the simulation, because the cost of the business will be dramatic. Getting them to be playing as pretend users in a simulation rather than being real users working on the day job. So what we can provide is user emulation. So these user emulations can generate traffic like real users would do. Sending and receiving emails, going to web services and transacting those web services. All of the components and the content that would actually really work, but also they can be used as one of the attack vectors, because we can actually send in an attack into one of that user emulation environments to start the attack. So one of the major vectors these days is phishing attacks. It could be we use a phishing attack. It could we use a particular vulnerability within one of the systems as well. So however we're going to do that attack, we can actually use that simulation layer to generate it. Above that, then, we've got our special forces area. So all of our teams that will be involved in this. So, our defenders, our blue team, our SOC team will be there. We'll have our red team that are going to attack, and that could be a red team from your organisation, but it could also be a red team that we supply or a third party supplies. So as long as we've got that red capability is key. Also, we could have some purple teams. So these are people that are going to work between the blue and the red side of things to ensure that things are working correctly, but also to do some forms of evaluation as well. But also then we've got the observers, which are just looking over the shoulder of everybody to see what's happening and evaluate what's happening with the skills of the individuals, the skills of the team as a whole, but also process procedures and the technology that's been utilized in there as well. And on top of that, we're going to look at analytics. So how can we capture information to understand how effective and how quickly people are responding to some indicators of compromise, and then going in and actually doing something to resolve the situation or and remediate it after that. So understanding how everything's going there. So they're the main components of what we'll be looking at. I'm going to jump forward to what a SIM might look like. So this is looking at a SIM and all the components of it. So we've got payment servers, in this case, firewalls, ATMs, lines of business services across there, and end users. But also we would have it customized with the appropriate technology, cyber components that you as an organization are using. Whether you're a Palo Alto user, if you're using Tanium, Splunk, CrowdStrike, or SentinelOne, we could actually put the exact same technology that you're using into this simulation for your live fire event to see how that technology works. But the other alternative, instead of just testing the people and process, we could actually evaluate technology, because we could try a different EDR solution in a particular part of the network or a different SIEM platform, or whatever we want to use to test to see if we're getting better results within the scenario as well. So those are the main components of what a SIM would look like. And then finally, this is how we would go about it. We'd actually look at range modeling and do range building and using ranges over a period of time to evaluate individuals and build the skills of those individuals, but also look at process and product testing, threat research, and building more efficiency within the team and assessing the team as a whole. So there's quite a lot of things we can do within a cyber range to achieve this. So I'll just turn that slide off now. So the key thing about a cyber range is we can simulate or closely simulate any environment. So whatever you are as a business, we can provide the infrastructure and components that business looks like. We can then overlay it with all the technology you use to protect and run your business. And then we can actually bring in your blue team, your red team if you have one, or we can supply the red team capabilities. And we can go through a live fire exercise. That could be 4 hours, 8 hours, even days if you need that level, and go through real world APTs or specific threat activities such as ransomware attacks and those pieces on those systems. Also, if you don't have the red team capability and you want to be able to drive this yourself, a majority of the threat capabilities are actually built into the SIM. So you can actually go off and pick a particular threat you want to do, whether that's something serious like a major ransomware attack from Conti, or whether it's actually going down the route of just doing some indicators of compromise, like some beaconing activity within the network and seeing if people can identify it. But what we're trying to do is make sure that the people themselves understand what they're doing and how to go about it. The process and procedures they're following work. The tools that they're utilizing, those software tools, are working correctly. Lines of communication are working correctly. And as a team as a whole, they are effective. And that's what it's all about. It's very similar to how we would do it from a military perspective. We'd go and look at it as a whole, making sure each of the components are working together as it should, communicating effectively, and ensuring that they're identifying quickly any compromises and moving forward quickly with some remediation activity. So that's what a cyber range is about. As a business, you need to consider what you need from a cyber range. It may be a subset of the systems you've got. It may be a specific area you want to train your people in. So a cyber range can be used for many things. Training of people, evaluation of the staff and processes, but evaluating technologies is one of the key things. You imagine the amount of money and licensing you're spending across, the 6 to 10 to 12 different technologies that you're utilizing within your business. How effective are they? Could you take 1, 2, 3 of those components away and still be as effective in dealing with an attack, but saving quite a large amount of money? Could you put in an alternative that's actually going to give you a much better response, but also may take away 2 or 3 other components that you don't need anymore because they're covered within that solution? So there's lots of things you can do with a cyber range and within an engagement, which we call a live fire engagement. So a live fire engagement is a SIM that's been developed specifically for a group of people. Bring those people into the range and then start an exercise where we'll go through some breaches and go through some compromises and see if they're picking them up. Coming on to people who don't have their own SOC team. So if you're paying very large amounts of money for a third-party SOC, wouldn't it be good if you could evaluate them? Understand if they're actually responding as quick as you think they're responding to an attack and dealing with it quickly. So what we can do is also do a particular live fire engagement that actually tests out third-party SOC capabilities and the technologies they're using, because most of them will actually put their own technology in place and want to utilize those to deal with the situation. Again, we can get that set up. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a picture about what cyber ranges are, where they came from, and how they've been utilized. If you want to see more about cyber ranges and specifically SimSpace, We operate as sim operators for SimSpace ranges. So what we can do is give you more information about a range, how it would function, how you could utilize it, and the capabilities you could utilize within that. And we could also then put together a live fire engagement for you to test out your infrastructure, but then build on that capability with training in many other areas. Again, we could also provide some evaluation of your technology, utilizing it within the range in a safe environment that's not going to affect your production systems. My contact details are here, so if you want to just grab my details and contact me in a different way rather than booking a meeting, you can get them through a Linktree. And then finally, the SimSpace website is www.simspace.com. So if you'd like to go there and find more information about SimSpace himself, you can do that. They are still operating all the Sims for the US Cyber Command and many other military organizations, because if we look at where we are from a military standpoint, cyber is becoming a major threat. The Royal Air Force has taken it on seriously with their Project Astra, and it's a key part of their development of support services and offensive and defensive capabilities for the UK military. But US military have been doing it quite some time now. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me today. Tomorrow we're talking about physical security. So if you're interested in looking at some pieces around CCTV, access control, those things, it dovetails nicely into cyber, because there may be a physical component of some kind of attack that you might have. People come in either doing social engineering physically on site or trying to get access to systems, but also you could have an insider threat as well, and we can capture that with CCTV capabilities. So if you're interested in that, we're doing that 1:30 tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you.